Hi, welcome to another in the Master Series of talks from Cisco Live in Barcelona. My name is Peter Jones, I'm a distinguished engineer and I'm so happy to be here. So here's the thing, we think networking always goes forward, but my talk today is about doing 10 megabit Ethernet again. So we really are going back to the future. So that's the quick intro, let's get into it. So here's my agenda for today. I'm going to set the stage. I'll talk about Cisco and Industrial Ethernet, 10 megabit single pair Ethernet, which is the key part of my talk, where we go next in the wrap up. And just for a quick one, I want to take a quick bow. That's actually my photo over on the right-hand side. That's the Porta Fiera Hotel, which is right close to the convention center here. That was from last year. All right, let's go. So I've been with Cisco 15 years, and I finally figured out what I do is I add value to infrastructure. So if you think back a little while, this is when the interstate systems in the US started. So it was authorized in 1956, and it was done both for thinking about defense and for moving people around. They completed it, considered complete in 1992, $114 billion. And they did basically 49,000 miles. Now what's interesting is the lane width is 12 feet, or 3.7 meters. So what you're seeing over there on the left, this is the Corvette from 1956. So that's sort of the car they were thinking about doing, right? This would have been a special car if you were really well off or excited. But here's the Corvette from 2020. What's interesting is this uses the same infrastructure they built in 1956. So it wasn't just built for a short period, it was built for ages, and we've done more and more things of that infrastructure. All right, so there's some terms here, I'm not going to go in detail. Information technology is the general thing that we talk about. This is where most computer networking lives. So this is what you do when you go into your office, you get up your phone, you get up your laptop, and you talk to the corporate network. Operational technology, or OT, this really is computers to monitor the state. So if you consider a building, there's what people in the building use, then there's everything else, the lights, the HVAC, the building controls. So this is what they call non-carpeted space, or field buses. Field buses is a generalized term, and it really is an old style of network that controls a particular type of device. So one type of field bus is called BACnet, there's another one called LALI, there's another one called LonWorks or DeviceNet. So these are all separate and different protocols that the automation systems run on. So the real question is how are we going to think about getting those closer to today? So again, going back to the start, this is the start of Ethernet. So the picture you're seeing right now was drawn in 1976. It was drawn by Robert Metcalfe, who's considered the inventor of Ethernet. And it was this one was drawn to present at the conference. And what you're going to see in the middle is that this thick white floppy cable called the Ether, otherwise known as ThickNet. So if anyone's been around for a while, we know this cable. It looks like the one over there on the left. It was big, heavy coax cable. You put a vampire tap in it. But they called it the Ether. So Ethernet is older than most of the people in the industry today. I think I figured out I was 9 when they got it invented. So that was 1973 at Xerox PARC. The patent came in 75, and our first standard was actually approved in 83. And this has really become the basis of all wired communication. So I do a lot of work with some of our analyst groups like Deloro, and I think about Ethernet speeds. What you're seeing here is the forecast from about a year ago out to 2022. What you can see is interesting. You see that the bulk of the market is a gigabit or 1,000 base T. You also see 100 gigabit is going away, 2.5 and 5 are growing. What's interesting is 2001 was when we last sold 10 megabits. That's a long time ago. It's going to be 20 years. So why would we want to go back 20 years? So my normal place where I live in the ecosystem is I live in the enterprise part of the network. So I work in the group that builds Cisco switching, routing, wireless, and also industrial. So that's where I really made my career. It's that network that when you go into work, you basically sit down at your desk, either you plug into a wire, or you use Wi-Fi. That is the Cisco enterprise network. So we both fundamentally do the network in the office you live in, and there's sort of the back end of the data center. By the way, quick plug, this is the 2019 Ethernet roadmap from the Ethernet Alliance. You got to see this. Go take a look at the Ethernet Alliance website. I think we have a 2020 roadmap coming out in a couple of months. What's interesting about this is it gives you a way to describe the breadth of Ethernet. All the way from the service provider way over there on the right, through the cloud, the web scale guys, enterprise where I do my living, in car networking, which is coming forward. And the topic of this talk is really the automation sector. OT or automation, how you make that work, bring it forward to Ethernet and give them the benefits that we've had. So, let me get going with this story. If you take a look at this slide here, this is really networking in about 1990. So we sort of, at this stage, every company had their own interface, their own connector, their own protocols. So what's interesting is on that word salad over on the left, I actually worked on a lot of these. Early in my career, I wrote a TD830 emulator. I worked with DECnet, I worked with Novell, not so much token bus, but token ring. So, around about that time, we had basically everything in the network. Everyone built it themselves. What's interesting is that we've moved. All these protocols and physical connectors at one stage were considered key advantages for the companies. But over time, we've migrated everything across the TCP/IP. That journey's taken a long time. I think I got into the industry my first working was around 1984. And I certainly remember this from around 1990, maybe 89. So we had all this stuff out here, but it's all pretty much gone away. So I'm going to guess if you're younger than 40, you don't know any of these terms. So this is the IT network. We went through this migration. And the migration really has been, Cisco was at the key of this, and it's really been a way to unlock creativity and productivity. The way I tend to say this is that now these days, network access is like oxygen. You just expect it to be there. You don't notice it until it goes away. So, the IT world has really gone through this translation. So what about the OT world? Well, right now, they're sort of in the same position that IT was about 1990. Again, if you go over and look at the word bubble, we have Ethernet IP, we have Foundation Field Bus. I mean, some of this is thrown in companies, so RS-232 is pretty common. Daily is something that's used with lights. CAN is all over the place. Modbus, I think, is mostly in build automation. HART, I think, is on the outside. So all these things exist all differently. So what you have is you have a whole lot of different networks and different network topologies. Technologies, and none of them can talk to each other. So if you think about it as the way expectations are changing, this clearly can't finish. So again, the question becomes, is these people have to move? Really, how can we help them move? So I like to talk about adoptability or consumability. And it really matters, otherwise you can build technology that can't be adopted. So let's just think about a simple example of this. So this is a Volkswagen Golf, right? The Volkswagen Golf is an exceedingly popular car. It's sold, I don't know how many millions across the world. Everyone can get it, you can go buy it, you can go use it, it's really easy. But imagine for a second if I said, look, I've gone and done some work, I've been working away for 5 to 10 years, I've come up with a car that's 5 times better than the Golf. It's cheaper, it goes faster, it's less service, more comfortable. You would say, great, how do I get one? I'd say, wait a second, there's only one minor issue. So the car I've built you is 1.5 lanes wide. So it cannot work in any of your current cities, you have to build a new city. That's sort of an analogy for where networking has often been. We've made people change and come to us. So we say, we've got this great idea. If you just throw away everything you have, it'll be awesome. So that's not really helpful anymore. I mean, at one stage, every network was new, so you could sort of get away with it. But right now, we have that infrastructure, and our job is to get more value out of it, not to go and say, build new stuff. I mean, a simple example of this is I did some work on 2.5 and 5G base T, 802.3BZ or N base T. So the key point about that particular technology was you could take existing category 5E cabling that ran at 1 gigabit and run it 2.5 or 5. So I could deliver you new value on the infrastructure you already owned. Sort of like that Corvette, the Corvette from '56 versus the Corvette from 2020. Very different cars, but they run on the same infrastructure. So, a quick background. So, probably most people know a little that Cisco is involved in industrial Ethernet. I certainly did. But when I was having a conversation with my colleagues at the standards bodies, because I do standardization work, so, quick side note, IEEE 802.3 is the standards body for Ethernet. So when you want to start a project, you go to have a conversation with people. What's interesting is to make a technical decision, you need 75% of the room voting by individual. So when I was going in and having a conversation about industrial Ethernet with people, what I didn't realize was how much we had. So quickly going forward, here's sort of some images that we have. And so these are examples of what we call industrial. Now, if you look at the one at the top, that's clearly more industrial. The one at the bottom is more like a factory, or maybe a warehouse. So these are all the things where you're running what they call operational technology to keep things safe. It may be on a ship, it may be in a shipyard, it may be an oil and gas plant, it may be an iron ore mine. This is the operational technology, and this is where Cisco is actually leading the way. So this slide is clearly too many words. So this is really in here as a reference, right? So industrial Ethernet is using Ethernet in an industrial environment. And so I would say in an automation environment, because it could be the same, it could be in a factory, it could actually be running in the ceiling of your building. Let's imagine you took a look up in your building today, not so much in home, but in your office, you would see a few things attached to the IT network, maybe a couple of access points. Then you'd see everything else. You would see the lights, you'd see the HVAC, you'd see the temperature sensors. So that's all of the OT world, and we're sort of trying to move towards the OT world with Ethernet. What you see at the bottom here is that we often have standard Ethernet, and we might fit it in a particularly harsh environment. But the key point here is that this entire automation industry wants to move to Ethernet and current technologies. I mean, they're also going to be using LoRaWAN and 5G and those types of things. But they want to adopt Ethernet to make their business better, to make it more efficient, and to let it innovate faster. So what I've dropped up here, this is just a quick list of the industrial Ethernet switches that Cisco has at the minute. I just went and pulled these off the website. And part of the reason I pulled this off was to explain to some of my peers in the industry that Cisco has a massive investment in industrial Ethernet. It also got into a conversation about connectors. So out of this, right, we sell all these, we're highly successful. Over in the top left, you'll actually see the IE3500 heavy duty series. So that's the one with the M12 connectors. And if you happen to be at a Cisco Live sometime, or maybe just watching online, go take a look at the video where we have this running and providing PoE while it's sort of in a waterfall. So you can sit there and watch the water raining on this thing. So when I was doing my research, I actually went looking and I found this on the Cisco website. I was a little surprised. I didn't realize that we were the leader in the market. So this market, which is going to be coming along, slow growing, but it's going to fundamentally transform the industrial automation market, Cisco is the leader. So you can see right there's the numbers from 2016 and 2018. So we are starting to pull away from the major competitors. What does this mean? This means we have the ability to do the transformation that Cisco enabled in the IT network in OT as well. So if you think for a minute how many factories and facilities there are in the world and warehouses, it's a huge opportunity both for Cisco and to enable the world. So you tend to see our executives talk about, we wish to improve the world. So my belief is that we have the ability to make the world better by enabling companies to do what they want to do better. So this is from ARC Marketing. We have a similar one from IHS Market. So again, what you're seeing is Cisco's becoming the leader in industrial edge networking. So this means we have a great opportunity and also a great responsibility. It's our job to basically take the industry forward with us so we actually deliver the benefits. One of the things I passionately believe in is if we take an entire industry forward and we make it one big playing field, everyone wins. So we make it so that we have one playing field to compete on, and we compete on our real skills and qualities. So part of what I need to do is make sure I enable and take an entire industry with me, which is sort of the fun part of my job. So let's get down to the meat of this talk. 10 megabit per second SPE. Yep, that's right, I sent 10 megabit. Sometimes when I say this to people, I go, you mean 10 gigabit? No. 10 terabit? No. I mean 10 megabit. SPE is the short name for single pair Ethernet. If you go and look at the normal Ethernet cables you see in an office, the copper cables, they're called a category cable. It might be category 5E, category 6 or 6A. So they're what's called a 4-pair cable. Now, if you go back in time, you'll actually know that originally for 10 megabits and 100 megabits, you only use 2 pairs. But for gigabit, you needed 4 pairs. So we had fun at one stage with people splitting out 2 pairs, but put that to the side for the moment. So the bulk of the Ethernet we sell today, in terms of numbers, is what's on 4-pair copper cabling or category cabling. This is 10 megabits on single pair. So I talked a little bit of field buses before. So I assume we'll make this PDF available, you can go take a look at this. So field buses are really a different type of thing. They're not the things that IT guys are used to. So this is the people who go in, who might install elevators, the ones who install your HVAC, maybe the controls on your doors. So field buses, they're all over the place in the OT networks. So the thing to think about is, in the middle of that network is now Ethernet. So we're really talking about getting out to the edge of that network. So in my not very humble opinion, because I'm really not very humble, this is the next network to converge. So if you think about it for a minute, the first Cisco IP phone we ever sold, I think, was 1998. Let's imagine at that stage you're making an investment decision, like where do I want to go? Where should I put my money? Let's say you thought, this voice over IP thing, yeah, it's never going to work. The LAN cable's not right. Let's imagine you'd invested all your retirement funds in Nortel or one of the other big telco manufacturers. So I think we are on the verge of this conversion where we can move from field bus to a common technology and common protocols. And I think it's going to be huge. Right, so why single pair? So as I said before, this is really for the OT guys, right? And they're a different set of people. Convergence is coming, but they come from a fundamentally different point of view. Where maybe in the IT world, we can live with the network going down for a while. It's really not okay to have your elevators, your door controls go out, or maybe your HVAC. So this technology is being used in a bunch of places. It's actually there's a bunch of work happening to basically make an all Ethernet car. And we can have another long conversation upon that. But they want to replace their older technologies, things like LIN and CAN, with Ethernet work. So right now the standards, they've already done 100 meg and a gig, 10 megabit is there, and they're actually working on 2.5, 5, 10, and 25, because they're actually going to try and solve autonomous driving problems. If you actually go take a look at how they're going to build a car, it looks like a mini enterprise. There's a lot of sensors on the outside, there'll be compute clusters, so they're building everything. But in the car world, they have very harsh environmentals, they're also very worried about weight. So the car business is not the one I'm personally involved in. I'm being involved in building industrial automation. And the protocols there were HART and Profinet and DALI and 420 milliamp. So there's a very simple common thread here. Where they are at the minute, they can't stay there. People want to do preventative maintenance. People want to do analytics. So they have to remove that barrier. So right now, they're sort of here. They're on the way towards Ethernet, but it's here. We have to figure out a way to get them there. So the existing technology can't really do what they need to do. Also, the people understand it, sort of look more like me than someone coming out of college. So the way it used to be, you might get an alarm from a machine. You'd send out some guy with a hammer. He's going to whack the device. He's going to listen to it, and he's going to tell you what doesn't work. Of course, today I want to come in, I want to get my phone, I want to log into it. So these field buses and their gateways are now an issue. We have a huge installed cabling base, and I have some numbers later on. But basically what you find is that infrastructure, the basic nervous system of the buildings, is all there. The other thing which is interesting is the way they design it is a very deep in the mind. So we know how to design an enterprise network today. There's core distribution access, it's copper from access to the device, it's 100 meters, then it's fiber and fiber. These guys design their things differently. Now I can go to them and say, look, hi, I'm from Cisco, I'm from IT networking, I've got this great idea for you, why don't you fundamentally change the way you design all your entire buildings and your control structure? Now, maybe I'm right, maybe that's the right thing to do, but that's a hard thing to listen. So I think rather than come in and say, look, we know the right answer, we have to really start from where they are. So we have the common threads. They need to change. Installed cable base is huge. The assets are very long-lived, and they have a way of doing things. So 10SP or 10 meg single pair Ethernet. We can provide the Ethernet brand and the standardization, right? Because Ethernet just works, you plug it in. The network becomes simpler because I took out a whole bunch of devices and I can migrate from older protocols. The other thing is, because we looked at how they build the networks today, they don't have to restructure them. So traditionally in a copper network, you get 100 meters. So depending on where you are, these guys might want to run a kilometer They might want to run multi-drop. So again, I can come and tell them how to change what they do today, but I prefer to make what they do today better. So here's an example, and if you take a look at the fine print, you notice this is from an ODVA conference in 2014. ODVA is one of the key industrial alliances on protocols. So even in 2014, they said, we have standard Ethernet, we have industrial Ethernet, we're missing a part on the edge. What's interesting about the part on the edge is it's like the edge of your nervous system, right? This is where you need all your information. So while we got a great benefit from going to the Ethernet in the back end, their real benefit they can get to is that side end. So, they need things like cable links above a kilometre, right? They're currently running 1,200 baud to hundreds of kilobits. They need to do the reach and the rates. The environments are different, right? You might be in a oil and gas plant. You might be in somewhere that it has explosions. So they call that intrinsically safe. So an intrinsically safe piece of gear cannot generate a spark. Clearly, if this piece of equipment is in, for instance, an oil and gas plant, or it's in a flour warehouse, you have to guarantee they cannot spark. So part of the issues with the current copper-based Ethernet is you can store enough charge inside one of the capacitors to produce a spark. So we have to look at where these people are and work out how to bring Ethernet to them. Why is it single twisted pair? That's really easy, it's what's there already. So again, if we start off with where the people are and we help bring them forward, this is an awesome story because it makes the value adoptable. So we're looking at, the foundation, the heart, the Profibus 4 to 20 milliamp. There's a lot of different buses out there, but they all are often designed in a similar fashion. So the goal is to bring Ethernet to the edge, be able to build smarter and smaller sensors, provide power and also multi-drop. So here's a quick overview of the main standard that we've recently completed. The standard is called ADA 2.3 CG. So in case you're wondering, the CG part doesn't mean anything, it's just named in sequence. So the first one was ADA 2.3, then A, then B, then C. As you can see, we're doing standards in a hurry. I don't remember how many we have active today, it's probably 14, 10. So CG doesn't mean anything, but the short name is 10 meg single pair Ethernet. So we're doing 10 meg Ethernet on a single balanced pair. Why do we say pair instead of cable? Because sometimes people run this across backplanes. So we're targeting building and industrial automation. So similar to the current base Ethernet, we're looking at power and also data on a single piece of cable. So .3 CG is finished, to publish about now. And it covers 2 point-to-point reaches, 15 meters, really designed for cars, and 1,000 meters for oil and gas. Multi-drop, we have 25 meters, 8 stations, and a technology called PLC I'll talk about in a minute. So why do we do multi-drop? It's very efficient on cabling, and it's also what the current technology does today. So, back to my previous story. I could come in and say, look, I'm from IT and I'm here to help, but then the OT guys are going to run a mile. So what I have to do is I have to look at what they have today and make it better. I already talked about cabling, cable topology reuse. It's small. We're looking at the size of the connector is about half the size of an RJ45. We also want to go to connectorization because a lot of this market runs screw terminals. Yes, I said screw terminals, that's what they're used to. So they haven't yet got along to the progression for connectorization we want to go to. So if you take a look at the pictures, over there right in the top right, you'll see there is just the round connector. That will be the connector that runs inside an M8 connector. The one beneath it, that's the same sort of connector you'd run in a normal environment. Over in the middle, you see the 2 pieces of cable. The blue one, this is what they would normally call 18-2. So it's 2-wire, 18 gauge. The red one, this is a very similar thing, but this is actually for fire safety systems. These are the target types of cable, because these are what are used today. All right, I talked a bit about hazardous locations. So there's a working group between Philcom, ODVA, and Profibus. So they're designing what they call the advanced physical layer. So they're building on top of single pair Ethernet to really connect process and industrial automation in remote and hazardous locations. So again, we're going to take Ethernet to where it needs to be. So I mentioned earlier we're doing multi-drop. So hands up all those who remember doing multi-drop Ethernet, that would be me. So the interesting thing about multi-drop Ethernet is if you go into high load, CSMACD doesn't work so well. It's part of the back-off mechanism. So traditionally, in a high utilization multi-drop Ethernet, your throughput went down, and your time to get onto the media could actually take forever. So that wasn't going to be acceptable for this market. So what we did is we did what's called a reconciliation sublayer. We put basically a shim in on top of the multi-drop, which makes it work. At 100% load. It also makes it bounded latency. So what you can see in the graphs at the bottom, the orange is CSMACD, the traditional thing we're used to. And what you can see is when it gets busy, your throughput is 6 megabits instead of 10. So the blue line, this is what's called CSMACD with PLCA, or file-level collision avoidance. And the result of that is, under load, you have predictable time to get on the media and you have high utilization. So this makes it possible to go and design a control loop on top of this technology. So some quick stuff. So I told you a moment ago, we have a standard already done that's called 802.3CG. We have another standard in progress. And in fact, I'm at Cisco Live in Barcelona, but last week I was in Geneva working on this standard. In this case, SPMD is single pair multi-drop enhancements. So we did multi-drop initially in the first project, and as we went through the project, it became more and more interesting. And so we figured out there's some extra things we need to do. We need to provide power on multi-drop like we do power on point-to-point Ethernet. We need to go further, more nodes, and we need 1588. So the example uses we're hearing about, all right, we have lighting, industrial sensors, elevators, transportation. So the interesting thing you see in the graph over there is, again, even under heavy load with lots of nodes, PLCA throughput stays very consistent. Again, that means I can run a control loop on this thing and not be scared and get kicked off the network. Here's an example. I work a lot with Panduit, they're one of our partners. This is the headquarters they built. They put everything they could possibly put onto Ethernet, right? The door controls, the lighting controls. And Panduit's a cabling company, so they knew how to do this. So they put in 600,000 feet of 4K cabling and 500,000 feet of single pair. So my assertion to you is there's more single pair cable in the world today than there is 4-pair. That's the market we need to go. We need to bring it into the IT world. This is a bit of an eye chart. This is the standards activity. The key thing to take away here is we have a lot of groups working on this. IEEE is doing its part. TA is the guys who run cabling standards in America. So they're doing cabling standards for both enterprise buildings, industrial. ODVA's and Industrial Alliance is doing work, and APL is going ahead. So what we have is we have an entire industry working together to move forward. A couple of photos. I was recently at Rockwell Automation Fair. There's the good picture over there with the spools of cable. That's actually that's an example link running over 1,000 meters of cable. You see in the middle, it's actually just a picture of the connector. And the feeling these guys had was back to the future. If you look, you can see the DeLorean in the background. And so they were running single pair Ethernet to control the flux capacitor. Some more stuff from Rockwell Automation Fair. This is some early prototype stuff from Flick Networks for testing. And if you look over on the right there, there's actually a full live demo running from a bunch of people building industrial networks. So this technology is early in its life cycle, but it's starting to come through. All right, so what happens next? Cisco is a network convergence company. We've moved through the physical and protocol layers, voice to the network, video to the network, personal communications, and OT is next. So we have the ability to bring all these people along so I can build one network in a facility. So where are they today? So they're sort of like 1990, but they're on the way, right? They want the benefits of what we've had. So we want to take the network from being in the way to enabling them to move forward. What's the opportunity? We can provide the IT network lessons to OT. So if you think about it, if I have something that's, for instance, controlling an oil and gas plant, it's critical for me to provide lessons about network structures, segmentation in that facility. One network, replace the gateway by the switch, and local control becomes an on-site container. This is the opportunity we have in front of us. What are the barriers? These guys with assets with a really long life cycle. You know, a mine might run for 30, 40 years. And they're very expensive assets that don't take risks. The landscape is sort of fragmented. There's all these different companies. You know, we don't do it that way, but in reality, if I was going to go asked to build a new factory, I would want to be risk-free because the investment is so huge. What's our path to success? So we have to focus on the best practice. Like any networking topology, people can build all sorts of things. But if we align to what they're told to build, we have a chance of succeeding. I'm really interested in being able to do upgrades of the automation over the current infrastructure. So my father-in-law is a welder. So he lives in a valley in Victoria, which is full of coal mines and power plants. He actually works on the power plant shutdowns. So every couple of years they'll shut down the plant for 4 to 6 weeks. In that time I can change sensors, I can upgrade the control systems of that plant. So I think it's going to be enormous. So the fact I can do the upgrade and the new facilities can use the design patterns makes this adoptable. We're also moving towards having a consistent, coherent industry message from our two networking industries. All right, so let me wrap it up because you've been listening to me for a while. So, the base T is the most successful standard, right? We've sold more than 4 billion. We sell about 1 billion, there's about 1 billion ports between end devices and switches a year. And Cisco is built on cables, right? That's the foundation on which we run. So the cables you're seeing at the bottom here is from right to left. There's the red is the Cat5e, then the Cat6 and the 6A. Here's what people think of as an Ethernet cable. So I'm going to basically run the same play, but with the single pair stuff, power and data, design pattern reuse, common connectors and adoptability. These are the things that are going to let me get through this, and the goal is to build a way to unlock all of this value. So, hopefully you know the name of Don Quixote, and I do use this all over the world, or it's particularly good in France, in Spain. So, forgive me if I get this wrong, but Don Quixote is the oldest work of literature in the Spanish language. So Don Quixote was a nobleman, and so he wanted to go around righting wrongs. That was his thing, he wanted to give back. So him and his faithful manservant, I think was Pedro, Sancho, so they would go around like trying to help people, right, fix the wrongs. However, his eyesight wasn't so good. So he saw a windmill and decided it was a giant. And from this we get tilting at windmills, which often is trying to do something that's really hard to do, or maybe just a really hard job. So in this case, I'm being Don Quixote and the single pair is my windmill I'm tilting at. So my goal is to make a transition to enable Ethernet through all these markets. So that being said, this is the first edition of Don Quixote from 1605, and thank you for listening to me. This is the Masters series from Cisco Live in Barcelona.